The championship stopped with Chase on the ground.
Coach, did we win the semifinal?
Chase, look at me. Do not move.
His symptoms were impossible to hide.
How many fingers do you see?
4.
Mercer saw the clock, not the injury.
Get him on his feet. We still have time.
He does not know where he is.
This time, the cameras were watching.
Clear him, Paul. Not like this. Not on live television. One new trainer is ending everything these players worked for.
I am protecting an injured student.
Mercer demanded another quarterback.
Helmet on, Price. You're going in.
No, Coach.
Riker recognized the tremor.
You know she is right. I know.
The humiliation stopped being entertainment.
Put that helmet back on!
Not this time.
3 weeks earlier, they had mocked her.
Smile, trainer. This is your welcome video.
Move the phone. That water is reaching the outlet.
They expected her to break.
You will not last a week here.
Then do not give me a reason to stay longer.
Their first private conversation revealed the real rules.
Pain is part of football.
Confusion is brain trauma.
One mark connected the present to a dead teenager.
Simone, my head still hurts.
Marcus?
Simone closed the folder before the memory could fully take shape. She told herself the notation might be nothing more than a coincidence. Coaches borrowed the same shorthand, medical symbols repeated, and 17 years of guilt had taught her how easily the mind could find connections where none existed. There was no reason to believe Ridgeway High School had anything to do with the worst night of her life. Not yet. During Ridgeway's first playoff game, the danger Simone had sensed inside the program finally became impossible to ignore. Late in the third quarter, Devin Harris, the team's starting running back, absorbed a helmet-to-helmet hit while attempting to block for Chase Bennett. He remained on the ground for several seconds, and when he finally stood, he began walking toward the opposing team's sideline. Simone reached him before anyone else. Devin appeared confused, complained that the stadium lights had become too bright, and could not correctly identify the quarter. She removed his helmet and informed the coaching staff that he was finished for the night. Mercer's reaction was immediate. He argued that Devin had merely lost his balance. Dr. Vance performed a brief sideline evaluation, asking only a few questions before declaring the player alert. Devin insisted that he felt fine, but his words came too slowly, and he repeatedly blinked, as if trying to clear fog from his vision. Simone refused to return the helmet. Mercer moved close enough that only those beside him could hear. He reminded her that Devin's mother worked 2 jobs, that scouts were watching, and that missing playoff footage could cost the boy a scholarship. Simone understood the cruelty hidden inside the argument. Mercer was not protecting Devin's future. He was using Devin's poverty to make the child fear his own symptoms. She kept him out. Ridgeway still won by 17 points. Yet during the post-game press conference, Mercer told reporters that the victory had been more difficult because an overly cautious medical decision had removed a healthy starter. He never used Simone's name. He did not need to. Mason posted the edited sideline video before the team bus left the stadium. The clip showed Devin asking to return and Simone refusing. It excluded the collision, the confusion, and the moment Devin walked toward the wrong bench. By morning, thousands of people had seen it. Parents called her office. Former players accused her of weakening the sport. Local radio hosts questioned whether someone who had never played football should be allowed to influence a championship season. Mason's video reached more than 200,000 views within 3 days. At school, students began calling Simone the dream killer. Someone taped a sign to her medical room door, asking whether she planned to wrap the entire team in pillows. She removed it without comment. Devin's mother visited that afternoon. She did not complain. She brought Simone a container of homemade food and quietly admitted that Devin had vomited twice during the night. At the hospital, doctors confirmed a concussion. Mercer never mentioned that diagnosis publicly. Instead, he restricted Simone's access. She stopped receiving invitations to staff meetings. Practice schedules changed without anyone informing her. Players were instructed to report injuries to position coaches before visiting the medical room. Dr. Vance removed the medication cabinet key from her possession. The system was closing around her. Riker Sloan became Mercer's most loyal enforcer. He had always been aggressive, but pressure had sharpened that aggression into something more dangerous. His father had been laid off from a manufacturing plant 6 months earlier. The family was behind on mortgage payments, and Riker believed a college scholarship was the only way to prevent them from losing their home. Mercer knew this. Whenever Riker hesitated, Mercer reminded him how many young men would gladly take his position. He praised Riker's toughness in front of the team and questioned his courage whenever he admitted pain. During a Wednesday practice, Riker collided with a tight end and remained on one knee longer than usual. When he stood, he pressed his fingers against his temple. Simone approached, but Riker stepped away. He told the team that he did not need someone searching for excuses inside his head. Several players laughed. Mason raised his phone. Simone did not argue with him in public. She simply watched. For the remainder of practice, Riker reacted slowly to commands. He covered the wrong receiver twice and became furious when teammates corrected him. By sunset, he could no longer tolerate the stadium lights. After everyone left, Jalen Price found him sitting alone inside a dark storage room. Riker had turned off every light and was pressing a cold towel over his eyes. Jalen urged him to see Simone. Riker refused. He made Jalen understand that one medical report could cost him the season, his scholarship, and perhaps his family's house. He demanded silence, not because he trusted Mercer, but because he had convinced himself that fear was a luxury poor athletes could not afford. Jalen said nothing that night, but the silence followed him. Unlike Chase, Jalen had never been treated as Ridgeway royalty. He was a capable quarterback, patient in the pocket, and respected by younger teammates. But recruiters considered him too small and not explosive enough. Mercer valued him only as insurance. Jalen's distrust of football injuries came from his cousin Andre, who had suffered a spinal injury during a youth game. Andre had spent years learning to move through the world in a wheelchair, while coaches who once praised him gradually disappeared. Jalen understood that crowds loved sacrifice only while they could watch it happen. They rarely remained afterward. The following morning, Jalen told Simone what he had seen. She asked Riker to complete a neurological examination. He responded by humiliating her in front of the defense, accusing her of trying to remove the strongest players before the semi-final. Mercer allowed the performance to continue, then praised Riker for displaying leadership. Later that day, Simone found Riker vomiting behind the fieldhouse. He begged her not to document it. For the first time, the anger in his face disappeared. Beneath it was an 18-year-old boy, terrified of becoming useless to the people who depended on him. Simone told him that a scholarship would not matter if he could no longer read, work, or remember the people he was trying to save. Riker walked away. That evening, Mercer cleared him through Dr. Vance. Simone filed a written objection. The document vanished from the shared medical system by morning. She began keeping printed copies of everything. The next major clue came from Chase Bennett. While reviewing baseline assessments, Simone noticed that Chase's preseason cognitive score was far below what would be expected from a student with his academic record. His reaction time was poor, his memory results were inconsistent, and several answers appeared deliberately incorrect. She asked him to repeat the test privately. His score improved dramatically. Chase tried to dismiss the difference, but Simone waited in silence until he became uncomfortable. Eventually, he admitted that players had been advised not to perform too well during preseason testing. A low baseline made it easier to appear recovered after a concussion. He did not identify who had given the instruction. He did not have to. The moment Chase realized how much he had revealed, his expression changed. He accused Simone of twisting his words and left the room. Within an hour, Mercer knew about the conversation. He confronted Simone in the empty stadium. The afternoon sun stretched their shadows across the field as he explained that Ridgeway had survived because players understood sacrifice. He described college scholarships, family pride, and the economic value of a winning program. He portrayed every medical restriction as a threat against teachers, businesses, and students who benefited from football revenue. Simone asked how many damaged brains a trophy was worth. Mercer did not answer. Instead, he told her that outsiders always believed rules were simple because outsiders never had to live with the consequences of losing. For Mercer, defeat was not a sporting result. It was humiliation. Years earlier, he had been a promising college player until a knee injury ended his career. He had watched teammates continue toward professional opportunities while he returned to a town that barely remembered his name. Coaching gave him power over the story. Every Ridgeway victory proved that pain had not defeated him. Over time, he began demanding the same proof from teenage boys. If he had survived suffering, they could survive it too. If they broke, he blamed their weakness rather than his methods. Simone reported the testing manipulation to Principal Warren. The meeting included Mercer, Dr. Vance, 2 school board representatives, and a lawyer from the district. Simone brought the suspicious baseline scores, her missing medical report, and photographs of the damaged helmets. Mercer brought parent complaints, Mason's edited videos, and statements from athletes claiming Simone had created fear inside the program. Dr. Vance denied that medical documents had been removed. He suggested Simone might have failed to upload the report correctly. The school board members focused on public reaction. Ridgeway's semi-final game was days away. Sponsors had invested heavily. Alumni were already planning celebrations. No one openly accused Simone of lying. They did something more effective. They reduced her authority while pretending to support her. From that moment onward, no player could be removed from competition without Dr. Vance's approval, except in an obvious emergency. Simone would continue evaluations, but would not hold final control. Jalen objected during the next team meeting. He asked why a coach and sponsor had more power over injured players than the trained medical professional hired to protect them. Mercer waited until the room became silent. Then he removed Jalen from the second team offense, assigned him to the freshman practice unit, and excluded his footage from the digital package sent to college recruiters. The punishment sent a message to every player. Speaking for Simone could cost them their future. Jalen accepted the demotion, but Simone struggled with it. She had spent her career believing courage would encourage others. At Ridgeway, courage seemed to punish anyone who came near her. That night, she sat alone in the medical room, staring at the resignation letter on her laptop. Leaving would protect Jalen from further retaliation. It would stop the calls, the insults, and the daily battle against a town that had already chosen its hero. But leaving would also return full control to Mercer. A quiet knock interrupted her thoughts. No one was outside the door. On the floor sat a canvas equipment bag. Inside were photocopies of medication inventories, helmet inspection sheets, deleted injury reports, and printed emails. Several documents carried Eli Navarro's handwritten notes explaining where he had found them. The records showed that pain medication had been distributed without proper prescriptions. Helmets marked unsafe had been returned to players before important games. Injury reports had been altered after consultations between Mercer and Dr. Vance. One email instructed an assistant to remove concussion references before recruiters received a player's file. At the bottom of the bag lay an old team photograph. It had been taken in 2009 at Westfield High School, nearly 200 miles away. Grant Mercer stood in the back row, younger and thinner, wearing the jacket of an assistant coach. Simone recognized the uniform immediately. Westfield had been Marcus's school. Her hands began to shake as she turned the photograph over. Eli had written that he found it inside a box of Mercer's old coaching materials. Simone enlarged the image under the desk lamp. Mercer was holding a clipboard. A medical form had been clipped to the top, partially visible beneath his fingers. Written in red ink were the same characters she had found in Ridgeway's records. C12, cleared by coach. The memory she had resisted for 17 years finally forced its way forward. Marcus Carter had been 17 when he died. He had been fast enough to attract college scouts, quiet enough to avoid trouble, and determined to become the first person in their family to attend university on a full scholarship. Football was not merely a sport to him, it was a door, and everyone who loved him had been afraid that the door might close. The evening before his final game, Marcus called Simone at college. He complained of headaches after practice. He admitted that bright lights hurt his eyes, and that he had briefly forgotten where he parked his car. Simone was only 22. She understood ambition better than brain trauma. She knew scouts were attending the playoff game, and that Marcus believed one good performance could change their family's life. She told him to rest, drink water, and avoid giving coaches a reason to bench him. The next night, Marcus took a hard hit in the second quarter. He returned to the game. After another collision, he collapsed. He never regained consciousness. The official report stated that Marcus had hidden his symptoms, passed every required test, and insisted on returning to the field. The coaching staff claimed no one had observed confusion before the final hit. Simone believed that report for 17 years. She believed Marcus had lied. Worse, she believed her own advice had helped kill him. Now Grant Mercer's face stared back at her from the photograph. Simone drove home carrying the equipment bag and opened a storage box she had not touched in years. Inside were Marcus's gloves, old newspaper articles, the hospital bracelet her mother could never bring herself to throw away, and a videotape of his final game. She had watched it only once. The footage was grainy, recorded from the stands by a parent. Simone transferred it to her computer and studied the sequence frame by frame. After the first collision, Marcus stood slowly. He looked toward the wrong sideline. He stumbled near the numbers painted on the field. Then Grant Mercer entered the frame. Mercer took Marcus by the arm and led him away from the other medical staff. The camera could not capture their words, but it showed Marcus struggling to focus while Mercer held the play sheet in front of him. 4 minutes later, Marcus returned to the game. The evidence was not enough to prove exactly what Mercer had said, but it proved something the official report denied. Mercer had seen Marcus disoriented. He had known. Simone sat in the dark until sunrise. She could have released the video immediately. She could have told the media that Ridgeway's celebrated coach had been present when her brother died. But she understood how Mercer would respond. He would call her grief a motive for revenge. He would claim that she had joined Ridgeway to destroy him. The town would focus on her connection to Marcus instead of the students currently in danger. She needed evidence that Mercer had not merely made one terrible decision 17 years ago. She needed proof that he had built an entire career by repeating it. While Simone searched the records, another person began to question Mercer. Mason Cole had spent the season filming everything. He recorded speeches, practices, pranks, arguments, and private celebrations. His edited posts made players feel famous, and Mercer tolerated the camera because online attention attracted sponsors. Mason rarely deleted original footage. He believed every unused clip might become valuable later. One evening, while preparing a highlight video of Chase, Mason reviewed footage captured before the semifinal. The phone had been resting on a bench while Mercer spoke with the quarterback several feet away. The conversation was not meant for an audience. Mercer reminded Chase how to answer concussion questions. He instructed him to deny headaches, avoid mentioning blurred vision, and claim he remembered every play even when he did not. When Chase expressed concern about another collision, Mercer told him that champions could collapse after bringing home the trophy, not before. Mason replayed the recording. The first time he felt surprise. The second time, fear. The third time, shame. He had spent weeks turning Simone into a joke. Every edited clip had helped Mercer isolate the one person trying to protect them. Mason did not show the footage to anyone. Not yet. He copied it to a private drive. Ridgeway won the semifinal by 4 points. Chase threw the winning touchdown with less than a minute remaining, and the town celebrated as if the championship had already been secured. Cars filled the streets. Restaurants stayed open past midnight. Students painted Mercer's name across the school entrance. But Chase did not celebrate for long. During the final drive, he had taken a hit that twisted his head violently to the side. Afterward, he experienced flashes of darkness in his left eye and a headache that pulsed behind his temple. He told no one. For the next week, Chase trained in secret whenever Simone entered the field. Dr. Vance signed his clearance without conducting a complete examination. Mercer promised that one more game would guarantee the future Chase had been chasing since childhood. Chase's father reinforced the pressure at home. The Bennett family had donated heavily to Ridgeway football, and Chase's success had become part of their public identity. His father believed fear could be overcome through discipline. He reminded Chase that college programs did not build around athletes who frightened easily. By the night before the championship, Chase could no longer read small text with his left eye. He found Simone alone in the equipment corridor. For the first time since her arrival, there was no arrogance in his face. He admitted that the headaches had begun after the semifinal. He described the blurred vision and the moments when sound seemed far away. Simone told him he could not play. Chase stared at the championship banners hanging above them. He imagined the recruiters, his father, the crowd, and every person who had treated his scholarship as a promise. He asked what would happen if he felt better by morning. Simone explained that symptoms did not disappear simply because an athlete wanted them to. Another hit could cause permanent damage. Chase left without agreeing. Simone immediately documented the conversation and sent the report to Principal Warren, Dr. Vance, and the district lawyer. By morning, Vance had submitted a competing report stating that Chase denied all symptoms and passed his examination. Mercer accused Simone of misunderstanding an anxious student. The district informed her that Vance's status as team physician gave him final authority. For the championship game, Mercer removed Simone from the primary sideline medical position. She would remain near the tunnel and respond only when summoned. He believed he had finally neutralized her, but the system around him was beginning to fracture. Eli had preserved records Mercer thought were destroyed. Mason possessed the original recording. Jalen had stopped fearing punishment. Riker had begun to understand that loyalty to Mercer might cost him more than a scholarship. And Chase, beneath the lights of the largest stadium he had ever entered, was carrying an injury no amount of ambition could hide forever. As the Ridgeway Falcons ran onto the field for the state championship, more than 20,000 people rose to welcome them. Grant Mercer stood beneath the roar, convinced that history was about to remember him as the greatest coach the town had ever known. Simone watched from beside the tunnel. She saw Chase blink against the stadium lights. She saw him briefly lose his balance after the first warm-up throw. And when he looked across the field and met her eyes, she knew he remembered every warning she had given him. He played anyway. For 3 quarters, the championship unfolded exactly as Mercer had hoped. Chase threw with precision, Riker controlled the defense, and Ridgeway remained within 3 points of victory. Then, with less than 4 minutes left, Chase dropped back to pass. The protection collapsed. 2 defenders struck him from opposite sides, and the back of his helmet slammed against the turf. The stadium continued roaring for several seconds before anyone realized he was not moving. Simone was already running. She crossed the sideline before Mercer could call her back, pushed past a security officer near the numbers, and reached Chase while the final echoes of the crowd were still rolling through the stadium. For one brief second, everything around her seemed to disappear. There was no championship, no scoreboard, no angry coach, and no town waiting for a miracle. There was only an 18-year-old boy lying beneath the lights, with one hand curled against his chest and his eyes struggling to focus. Chase tried to lift his head. Simone immediately stabilized his neck and ordered him not to move. His breathing was shallow. His right hand trembled violently, and when she asked him where he was, his answer made no sense. He knew he was on a football field, but he believed it was still the semifinal. He could not remember the score. He could not remember the hit. When Simone held up 2 fingers, Chase said there were 4. Dr. Vance arrived several seconds later, followed closely by Mercer. Vance began to describe the condition as temporary disorientation, but Simone did not allow the language to soften what she was seeing. Chase had unequal pupil response, memory loss, visual disturbance, and worsening motor control. Those were not signs that could be explained away by adrenaline. She called for spinal precautions and emergency transport. Mercer looked toward the scoreboard. Ridgeway trailed by 3 points with 3 minutes and 41 seconds remaining. The Falcons had 2 timeouts. Their opponent had already begun gathering near the opposite sideline. If Chase returned, Ridgeway still had enough time to win. Mercer crouched beside the player he had spent 4 years calling the future of the program. He did not ask Chase whether he could feel his hands. He did not ask whether the pain was growing worse. He asked whether Chase could stand. Chase tried to nod. That movement alone made Simone's stomach tighten. She placed one hand against his helmet and reminded everyone around them that he was not to be moved until the emergency team secured him. Mercer ordered the backup staff to help Chase sit up anyway. Simone blocked them. For the first time, the conflict between her and Mercer was no longer hidden in a medical room or buried beneath polite language. It was happening in the center of the field, surrounded by officials, television cameras, parents, recruiters, and more than 20,000 witnesses. Mercer demanded that Simone step aside. She refused. The stadium had grown restless. Most spectators could not hear what was happening, but they could see Mercer pointing toward the sideline and Simone remaining beside the injured quarterback. The first wave of anger began in the Ridgeway student section. It spread through the stands as confused voices became accusations. They believed Simone was delaying the game. They believed she was stealing the championship. Mercer understood the crowd better than anyone. He had spent years teaching the town to connect Ridgeway football with pride, survival, and identity. He knew exactly how to turn that devotion against a single person. A field microphone had been left active near the medical team. Mercer picked it up, intending to address an official, but his voice traveled through the stadium speakers. He announced that Chase was conscious and willing to continue. He claimed a recently hired trainer was refusing to respect the judgment of the team physician. Then he described Simone as someone who had known the players for only a few weeks, yet believed she had the right to end a dream they had spent years building. The crowd answered with anger. Simone heard people demanding that she leave the field. She heard her name followed by words filled with contempt. Someone near the front row shouted that she had hated football from the beginning. Another accused her of wanting attention. Cameras moved closer. For a moment, Simone was no longer standing in the championship stadium. She was back in the hospital corridor 17 years earlier, watching doctors rush Marcus through doors that never opened for her family again. She remembered believing that one more game could change his life. She remembered the advice she had given him. She remembered how quickly ambition became grief. Mercer ordered Vance to clear Chase. Vance hesitated. Until that moment, he had always been protected by private rooms, vague records, and the assumption that no one would question a respected physician. Now, millions of viewers could see Chase's trembling hand. They could see his eyes failing to follow movement. They could see Simone maintaining spinal control while Mercer argued about time. Vance knew that signing another clearance in private was one thing. Doing it on live television was another. He attempted to withdraw, suggesting that the player should be evaluated near the sideline. Mercer's frustration broke through the discipline he had maintained for years. He forgot the microphone was still in his hand. He told Vance that Chase could collapse after bringing the trophy home, but not before the game was finished. The sentence traveled through every speaker in the stadium. The crowd fell silent. On the Ridgeway sideline, Mason Cole felt his entire body turn cold. He had heard those exact words before. They were recorded on his private drive. For days, Mason had carried the footage without knowing whether fear or conscience would win. He had told himself that Mercer was only motivating Chase. He had told himself that releasing the video would destroy the team. Most of all, he had told himself that he was too young to be responsible for what adults had chosen to do. But as Chase lay on the field, Mason finally understood what his silence had purchased. It had purchased 3 more quarters. It had purchased another collision. It had nearly purchased a funeral. Mason opened the cloud folder on his phone and sent every original file to a local investigative reporter whose messages he had ignored for weeks. He included the unedited prank from Simone's first day, Devin's full injury sequence, Mercer's instructions about concussion testing, and the recording made before the semifinal. He did not add a caption. He did not try to protect himself. He simply sent the truth. Near the bench, Jalen Price watched the ambulance team secure Chase onto a rigid board. Mercer turned away from the medical staff and ordered Jalen to put on his helmet. Jalen had imagined this moment since childhood. The starting quarterback was down. The state championship was within reach. Thousands of people were waiting for the backup to become a hero. Under any other circumstances, stepping onto that field would have been everything he wanted. But Jalen looked at Chase's face. He looked at Simone holding the injured quarterback's head steady, while the same crowd she was protecting continued to blame her. Then he looked at Mercer. The coach expected obedience. Every punishment, every lost practice rep, every threat against a scholarship had been designed to create this exact moment. Mercer believed Jalen would accept any command if the reward was finally large enough. Jalen removed his helmet. He placed it on the grass. Mercer stared at him in disbelief. Jalen did not give a speech. He did not need one. His decision was visible to every player on the sideline. Riker Sloan stood several feet away, still wearing his helmet. For weeks, he had defended Mercer more fiercely than anyone. He had mocked Simone, hidden his own symptoms, and treated pain as a debt he owed his family. Then he watched Chase's right hand shake against the straps of the emergency board. Riker knew that tremor. He had seen it in himself after practice. He remembered the dark equipment room, the cold towel across his eyes, and the fear that prevented him from asking for help. He remembered Simone finding him behind the field house and warning that no scholarship could replace the parts of his life a brain injury might take away. At the time, he had called her weak. Now she was the only adult standing between Chase and the people willing to risk him. Riker removed his helmet and set it beside Jalen's. A sophomore safety followed. Then Devin Harris, still recovering from the concussion Simone had identified weeks earlier, stepped forward and placed his helmet on the ground. One by one, the Falcons made their choice. Some acted because they trusted Simone. Others acted because they were frightened by what they had witnessed. A few simply followed their captains. But as the line of helmets grew across the sideline, each player understood that the championship could no longer be separated from the price Mercer expected them to pay for it. Mason lowered his phone and removed his helmet. Chase's closest friends followed him. The offensive linemen placed theirs down together. The younger players, who had spent the season afraid to speak, finally discovered that silence became easier to break when they were no longer breaking it alone. Within seconds, all 52 Ridgeway players had removed their helmets. Mercer moved down the line, threatening positions, scholarships, recommendation letters, and futures. He promised that any player who refused to continue would never wear a Ridgeway uniform again. No one picked up a helmet. Across the field, the opposing team watched in silence. Their head coach called his players together, but he did not celebrate the coming victory. He understood that the most important decision of the night had already been made. The officials waited. Ridgeway had enough healthy players to continue, but no one was willing to enter the game. After the required delay, the team accepted a forfeit. The championship was over. The opposing crowd began cheering, but the sound soon faded when the stadium screen displayed the emergency medical announcement. Chase was being transported for suspected intracranial bleeding. His father stood near the tunnel, pale and unable to speak. Only hours earlier, he had reminded his son not to embarrass the family by showing fear. Now he watched paramedics carry Chase toward an ambulance and realized how close that lesson had come to costing him a child. Simone entered the vehicle with the medical team. Before the doors closed, Chase's eyes opened briefly. He could not form a complete sentence, but he managed to focus on her face. Simone told him to remain still. For once, Chase listened. At the hospital, imaging revealed a subdural hematoma. Blood was collecting between the brain and its outer covering, increasing pressure inside Chase's skull. The neurosurgical team prepared him for an emergency procedure. Doctors later explained that the injury had likely begun during the semifinal and worsened through repeated contact. The championship hit had transformed a dangerous condition into a life-threatening emergency. Had Chase returned to the field, another collision might have killed him. Had treatment been delayed much longer, he could have suffered permanent neurological damage. The operation lasted nearly 4 hours. While Chase remained in surgery, Ridgeway's championship loss disappeared beneath a far larger story. The local reporter Mason contacted published the first unedited footage shortly before midnight. The video showed Mercer advising Chase to hide symptoms and repeat false answers during medical evaluations. Another clip showed the coach discussing deliberately low preseason baseline scores. A third revealed that Devin had been visibly confused before Simone removed him from the playoff game. The public narrative changed with astonishing speed. People who had called Simone a dream killer now began asking why no one had listened to her. Local radio hosts replayed Mercer's words from the championship microphone. Former players contacted journalists with stories they had kept buried for years. Some remembered being pressured to play through dizziness. Others described pain medication placed in their lockers without labels. Several recalled Mercer warning that reporting an injury would prove they lacked the character to compete at the college level. But public outrage did not erase what had happened. Simone remained at the hospital until Chase's surgery ended. She did not check social media. She did not watch the videos spreading across the country. The sudden support of strangers could not change the fact that an injured teenager was fighting for his future because an entire system had dismissed warning after warning. Shortly before dawn, the surgeon informed the family that Chase was stable. He had survived. The full extent of the damage would not be known for weeks, but the pressure had been relieved before it caused irreversible destruction. Chase's father wept in the hallway. When he saw Simone, he tried to apologize. The words failed him. For years, he had treated his son's football career as proof of the family's success. He had spoken about toughness while ignoring the fear in Chase's eyes. Simone did not offer easy forgiveness. She told him that Chase would need patience, rehabilitation, and a life in which his value was not measured by what his body could produce for others. For the first time, Chase's father understood that protecting his son would require more courage than pressuring him ever had. By Sunday afternoon, Grant Mercer had hired an attorney. He denied knowingly endangering players and claimed his championship remarks had been taken out of context. He described Mason's files as incomplete and accused Simone of influencing students against the coaching staff. Then he attacked her past. Reporters discovered that Simone's younger brother had died following a high school football injury 17 years earlier. Mercer's representatives used that information to portray her as emotionally compromised. They suggested she had joined Ridgeway with a hidden grievance and deliberately undermined the program. The strategy worked on some people. Questions began circulating about why Simone had not disclosed her connection to Marcus Carter. Commentators wondered whether she had been collecting evidence for revenge. Supporters of Mercer argued that personal tragedy had made her incapable of making objective decisions. Simone had expected this. Grief, when revealed at the wrong moment, could be used to discredit even the clearest truth. But Mercer had made one mistake. He believed Marcus's case was still buried beneath the official report. Eli Navarro changed that. The 16-year-old equipment assistant provided investigators with the records he had preserved. His documents showed repeated efforts to return damaged helmets to circulation, alter injury reports, and remove medical warnings from files sent to recruiters. Eli also revealed that he had witnessed Dr. Vance distributing prescription medication without individual evaluation. He had been told to discard inventory sheets and delete maintenance records. He saved them because something about the instructions felt wrong. No one had noticed. For years, adults had spoken freely in front of Eli because they did not consider him important enough to understand what he heard. Their arrogance made him one of the most valuable witnesses in the case. Jalen gave a sworn statement about Mercer's retaliation. He explained how his recruiting footage disappeared after he questioned Simone's reduced authority. Emails later confirmed that Mercer had instructed the recruiting coordinator to stop promoting Jalen until he learned to respect the program. Riker's testimony carried a different weight. He admitted that he had participated in humiliating Simone. He acknowledged hiding severe symptoms and pressuring younger players to do the same. He did not blame Mercer for every choice. He accepted that fear had made him cruel and that desperation had allowed him to become an instrument of the system. Then he described how Mercer used his family's financial hardship to control him. Whenever Riker reported pain, Mercer reminded him that his father was unemployed. Whenever he hesitated, Mercer asked whether protecting his head mattered more than protecting his family's home. Riker finally understood that this was not encouragement. It was exploitation. Mason surrendered his devices and cloud archives. The metadata confirmed that the recordings had not been altered. Investigators recovered footage reaching back more than 2 seasons. It showed Mercer rehearsing false medical responses with players, ordering staff to keep Simone away from Chase, and laughing with donors about how easily teenage boys could be convinced that injury was shameful. Mason also released the complete recording of Simone's first day. The public saw the bucket of ice water, the insults, and the laughter. More importantly, they saw Simone respond by protecting the boys from an electrical hazard rather than humiliating them. The woman portrayed as hostile had been protecting them from her first minute inside the building. Dr. Vance attempted to distance himself from Mercer. He claimed the coach had pressured him and argued that all medical decisions were based on information provided by players. Financial investigators found another explanation. Vance's clinic had received generous contracts from the school district and referrals from wealthy Ridgeway families. Payments from the booster organization increased during playoff seasons. Each time a prominent player was cleared quickly, the relationship between the clinic and the program became more profitable. The physician who insisted he had acted independently had built a business around giving Mercer the answers he wanted. The State Athletic Association scheduled an emergency hearing. Ridgeway High suspended Mercer and Vance pending investigation. Principal Warren was placed on administrative leave, while the district reviewed why Simone's authority had been reduced, despite documented safety concerns. The hearing room was smaller than the championship stadium, but the pressure inside it felt heavier. Parents filled the seats. Former players stood along the walls. Reporters waited outside for every development. Chase remained in the hospital, but his recorded statement was prepared for presentation. Mercer entered wearing a dark suit instead of his Ridgeway jacket. Without the field, the whistle, and the players waiting for instructions, he looked smaller. Yet he still carried himself like a man certain that his reputation would protect him. His attorney argued that football was inherently dangerous. He described Mercer as a demanding but successful coach whose words had been misunderstood during an emergency. He reminded the panel of scholarships, playoff appearances, and money generated for the school. Simone listened from the opposite side of the room. When her turn came, she did not begin with Marcus. She began with Chase. She described the symptoms visible before the championship, the report she submitted, Vance's contradictory clearance, and Mercer's decision to remove her from the sideline. She explained that medical independence existed for one reason. The person responsible for protecting an athlete could not also be responsible for winning the game. Then investigators played Mason's footage. The room heard Mercer instruct Chase to deny blurred vision. They heard him explain how a deliberately low baseline could protect the team. They heard him say that champions were allowed to collapse only after the trophy had been secured. Mercer claimed the words were motivational exaggeration. The panel then reviewed Eli's records, Riker's testimony, Jalen's recruiting emails, and the altered medical reports. The pattern became impossible to dismiss. This was not one careless statement. It was a system. Only after the current evidence had been established did Simone present the photograph from 2009. Mercer's face changed when it appeared on the screen. The image showed him standing with the Westfield coaching staff. The clipboard in his hand carried the same red notation later found in Ridgeway files. C12, cleared by coach. Simone explained that Marcus Carter had been her younger brother. The hearing room went silent. She did not claim she had come to Ridgeway seeking revenge. When she accepted the job, she did not know Mercer had been involved in Marcus's final game. She discovered the connection only after Eli found the photograph. She also did not hide her own guilt. She admitted that Marcus had told her about his headaches before the playoff game. She had encouraged him to continue because she believed a scholarship could change his future. For 17 years, she carried the belief that her advice had helped send him back onto the field. Mercer's official statement had allowed that guilt to grow. The old videotape was played. The footage showed Marcus absorbing the first hit. It showed him walking toward the wrong sideline. It showed Mercer taking him by the arm and separating him from the other staff. Then it showed Marcus returning to the game. Mercer claimed he could not remember the conversation. A final witness answered the question he refused to face. Thomas Keene, the former medical assistant at Westfield, had lived with the case for 17 years. After seeing the championship footage, he contacted investigators. Keene admitted that Marcus had failed the sideline assessment. He had shown confusion, visual sensitivity, and memory loss. Mercer pressured the staff to classify the symptoms as dehydration because college scouts were present and Westfield was losing. After Marcus died, Keene was ordered to rewrite the report. He complied because he feared losing his career. His silence protected Mercer and condemned Simone's family to believe Marcus alone had hidden the truth. Keene apologized, but the years could not be returned. Simone listened without satisfaction. She had imagined discovering the truth many times, but reality did not feel like victory. Marcus was still gone. Her mother had died, believing her son's ambition killed him. No ruling could restore what fear and obedience had taken. Yet the truth still mattered. It mattered because Chase was alive. It mattered because 52 players had learned that loyalty did not require self-destruction. It mattered because the next frightened teenager might now be believed before another collision made belief useless. The Athletic Association permanently banned Grant Mercer from coaching or supervising minors in sanctioned sports. The district terminated his employment. State authorities opened criminal investigations into child endangerment, falsification of medical records, and witness intimidation. Mercer's most painful consequence was not the loss of a single game. It was the destruction of the legacy he had sacrificed others to build. For years, he believed the championship banners proved his methods were justified. Now every victory was reviewed through the injuries he concealed. Former players returned their awards. Sponsors removed his image from advertisements. The statue planned for the stadium entrance was canceled before construction began. Inside Ridgeway's fieldhouse, Mercer's private trophy room was emptied. The space was later converted into an independent recovery center where athletes from every school sport could receive concussion testing, rehabilitation, and mental health support without permission from a coach. The room that once celebrated one man's victories became a place where injured students were finally allowed to matter. Dr. Paul Vance's medical license was suspended during a broader investigation. His clinic lost its contracts with the school district, and families who once trusted his reputation began examining years of treatment decisions. The booster organization underwent a financial audit and was required to fund independent medical coverage at every high school in the district. No coach would be allowed to overrule a return-to-play decision again. Principal Warren eventually admitted that she had recognized the warning signs, but feared the political cost of confronting Mercer during a championship season. She resigned after the district concluded that protecting the school's reputation had taken priority over protecting its students. Mason faced consequences as well. He lost sponsorships connected to his social media channel and was suspended from team media activities. Some people praised him as a whistleblower, but Mason refused to accept that description without acknowledging what came before. His edited videos had helped turn the town against Simone. He had captured suffering and converted it into entertainment. Sending the original files did not erase the harm. As part of his disciplinary agreement, Mason worked with journalism teachers to create a program about manipulated footage, online harassment, and the responsibility of anyone holding a camera. For the first time, he learned that recording the truth and presenting the truth were not the same thing. Riker was removed as defensive captain for the remainder of the school year. He apologized to Simone privately, but she did not allow the apology to become an easy ending. She told him that remorse mattered only when it changed how he treated people who could offer him nothing. Riker spent the following months proving that change through action. He spoke honestly to younger athletes about hiding his symptoms. He helped Eli organize equipment inspections and refused to participate when teammates mocked players seeking medical care. College recruiters still questioned whether his health would allow him to compete. Riker's future became less certain than he once believed. But for the first time, it was a future he could enter with his mind, memory, and dignity intact. Jalen's recruiting footage was restored. Several college coaches contacted him after seeing what happened during the championship. They were interested in more than his passing statistics. They saw a quarterback who had surrendered the largest opportunity of his life rather than participate in endangering a teammate. Jalen did not become a national superstar overnight. He received no impossible offer and no promise of fame. He earned a scholarship from a university that valued his leadership and offered him a fair chance to compete. Chase's recovery moved slowly. For weeks, he struggled with headaches, balance problems, and short-term memory loss. He became frustrated when ordinary tasks exhausted him. The same boy who once controlled an offense in front of thousands now needed help walking through a hospital corridor. Doctors eventually told him he could never safely return to contact football. At first, Chase heard only loss. Football had shaped his friendships, his relationship with his father, and the identity the town gave him. Without it, he feared he would become invisible. Simone visited during rehabilitation, but she never treated him as a fallen hero. She treated him as a young man beginning a different life. She reminded him that his ability to throw a football had always been only one part of him. The people who loved him would now have to prove they cared about what remained when the uniform was gone. Chase's father attended every therapy session he could. He learned to celebrate small improvements without turning them into demands. When Chase completed a balance exercise, his father did not ask how soon he could do more. He simply acknowledged the effort. Their relationship changed because football was no longer available to hide behind. Months later, Chase began assisting the rehabilitation staff. He discovered patience with younger injured athletes and became interested in physical therapy. The career he once viewed as a consolation gradually became a purpose. He would not play college football, but he would enter college. And this time, the future belonged to him rather than to a scoreboard. Simone was offered the position of district director for athlete safety. The board proposed naming the new recovery center after her. She declined. She did not want another building built around a single heroic story. Ridgeway's failure had not been caused by one evil coach alone, and it had not been corrected by one perfect savior. It had been caused by dozens of people deciding that winning mattered more than asking difficult questions. It had changed only when those people began refusing silence. Simone asked for the center to carry Marcus's number instead. 12. Not as a monument to the way he died, but as a reminder of every student who might still be saved. 1 year after the championship forfeit, Ridgeway returned to the state final. The program looked different. The new head coach attended medical meetings, but held no authority over clearance decisions. Players completed honest baseline tests under independent supervision. Every helmet carried a verified inspection record. Reporting dizziness no longer meant losing a position automatically. The changes did not make Ridgeway weak. They made the players trust one another. Jalen entered the season as starting quarterback. Chase stood near the sideline wearing a headset, helping analyze defensive formations. His movements were slower than before, but his mind had recovered enough for school and daily life. Riker attended from the stands during a break from college. Mason filmed for the student journalism department, where every edit required source review. Eli, once treated like invisible equipment staff, had become the student coordinator for safety compliance. Younger athletes asked for his opinion before choosing helmets. Simone stood in the medical area with full authority to protect every player on the field. Before kickoff, the 52 Ridgeway athletes walked to the sideline and removed their helmets. The stadium became quiet. For 12 seconds, the team stood in memory of Marcus Carter and every athlete who had been told that silence was the price of belonging. Then they lifted their helmets again. This time, removing them did not mean surrender. It meant remembrance. The championship game was close. Ridgeway trailed early, recovered in the second half, and entered the final minutes with a chance to win. But the most important moment happened long before the final whistle. During the third quarter, a sophomore receiver landed awkwardly after a catch. He stood up, took several steps, and felt the field tilt beneath him. A year earlier, he might have hidden it. He might have looked toward the coach, remembered the crowd, and convinced himself that dizziness was weakness. Instead, he raised his hand and walked toward Simone. No one mocked him. No teammate accused him of abandoning the game. Riker, watching from the stands, began applauding. The Ridgeway sideline joined him. The young player was evaluated and removed from competition. His replacement entered without complaint. At that moment, Simone understood that Mercer's culture had finally lost its power. Ridgeway went on to win the championship by 2 points. The players celebrated. Families rushed toward the field. Jalen lifted the trophy beside Chase, and for one night, the town was allowed to enjoy the victory it had chased for so long. But the trophy was not carried into Mercer's old room. It was placed in the entrance of the number 12 Recovery Center, beneath a simple message reminding every athlete that no game was worth more than the person playing it. Simone remained near the edge of the celebration. She thought of Marcus, not as the boy beneath hospital lights, but as the younger brother who once raced her home from school and laughed whenever she pretended to let him win. For 17 years, his memory had been tied to guilt. That night, it finally became something else. A warning had become protection. A loss had become a reason to listen. And a silence that once destroyed one family had helped 52 young men find the courage to break it. Real strength was never the ability to ignore pain until the crowd stopped cheering. It was the courage to tell the truth while everyone was demanding a sacrifice. A coach could teach a player how to win a game. A crowd could teach him how to chase applause. But only a true leader could remind him that his life still mattered when the scoreboard wanted something from him. And sometimes, the bravest thing an athlete could do was not to put his helmet on. It was to know when to take it off. If you believe no trophy is worth a young person's life, share this story with someone who needs to hear it. And tell us in the comments, would you have had the courage to put your helmet down? 3 hours before the Saravan Cultural Council arrived to challenge Arden Museum's ownership, the museum's brightest scholars were losing a battle against a piece of clay.
We cannot let the council see uncertainty.
Then a soaked 17-year-old girl walked into the lobby, carrying a torn backpack and a volunteer application. Her name was Nadia Reyes.
Are you here for the shelter referral program?
Nadia shook her head. She had not come to ask for help. She had seen a flyer and came to apply as a volunteer.
No, I saw a flyer and came to apply as a volunteer.
But when she glanced at the digital scan of the ancient charter, her expression changed. She stepped closer to the screen.
That tablet is upside down.
The scholars turned toward Nadia in disbelief. Dr. Julian Mercer noticed her claim, not with curiosity, but with immediate contempt.
You are saying every scholar in this building has been reading it wrong?
Dr. Mercer asked where exactly she had learned to read a language trained experts had struggled with for years.
And where exactly did you learn what trained experts could not?
Nadia tightened her grip on her backpack. Then she answered that her mother had taught her everything she knew.
My mother taught me.
Then Nadia looked directly at Mercer and said the name he had hoped never to hear again, Elena Reyes.
Elena Reyes.
For the first time that morning, Dr. Julian Mercer looked afraid. The lobby became so quiet that Nadia could hear rain striking the windows. Mercer called Elena a former employee who had worked briefly as a restoration technician, trying to make Nadia's mother sound insignificant.
Your mother worked here briefly. That is all.
Nadia said the writing was not meant to be read from left to right, and that the marks along the edge were directional guides.
Those marks are not cracks. They tell you where to begin.
Nadia explained that the sentence began at the border and curved inward. Her mother had given that route a name Mercer clearly recognized.
My mother called it the Guardian's Path.
My mother called it the Guardian's Path, Nadia said. The phrase landed heavily. Mercer's expression tightened before he could stop it. The Guardian's Path. It was not a phrase a teenager would have invented. It was not something she could have guessed from a quick glance at the screen. Elena had used those exact words in her notes. They had appeared in the report Mercer had hoped would disappear forever. The junior scholars gathered closer to the monitor. One enlarged the lower border. Another brought up older scans. A third began comparing the marks against a database of known Saravan inscriptions. Their movements became slower and more deliberate. The confidence they had shown before Nadia entered the lobby had begun to dissolve. For weeks, they had been trapped inside one interpretation. They had assumed the tablet was a sale agreement because the museum had always called it one. They had assumed the first line named an owner because every exhibition label, donor brochure, and academic summary said it did. They had not tested the possibility that the first line was being read in reverse. Evelyn Hart noticed the shift. She had been standing near the reception desk moments earlier, balancing a phone call from the board with messages from legal counsel and a growing stack of problems that no one else seemed willing to solve. Evelyn was not a historian. She did not claim to understand ancient languages. Her work was more immediate and less romantic. She managed budgets, staff conflicts, insurance concerns, donors, building permits, public relations disasters, and the 1,000 small emergencies that kept Arden Museum functioning. But she understood risk, and the silence around the research screen was beginning to sound like risk. She ended her call and stepped closer. Her eyes moved from the tablet to Nadia, then from Nadia to Mercer. She asked whether the reading direction had ever been tested, using the border marks as guides. No one answered immediately. That hesitation mattered. Mercer stepped in before the silence became too revealing. He said the team had examined all reasonable possibilities. He reminded Evelyn that the document had been studied by senior experts from several institutions. He warned that a museum facing an international legal challenge could not allow an unverified theory to disrupt months of preparation. He sounded calm, but he was speaking too quickly. Nadia saw it. Owen Blake saw it too. Owen was the security guard who had opened the side entrance for Nadia less than an hour earlier. At first, he had thought she had come inside to get out of the rain. Her jacket was old, her shoes were soaked, and the backpack on her shoulder looked as though it had been repaired more times than most people repaired anything. He had almost sent her away. Now he stood near the edge of the lobby, watching the museum's most respected scholar become unsettled by a phrase from an old notebook. Owen did not know the difference between a trade agreement and a custodial covenant. He did not understand Saravan grammar or ancient border signs, but he knew how people behaved when they were trying to hide fear beneath authority. Nadia continued before Mercer could close the conversation. She explained that the opening symbols did not appear to describe a sale. The grammar was wrong for that. If the border marks were followed, the first sequence became a declaration of protection. The document seemed to describe an object placed into another party's care. It sounded less like ownership and more like responsibility. That difference changed everything. A sale would mean Arden Museum had a legal claim to the relic connected to the charter. A guardianship agreement would mean the museum had only been trusted with it. And if that trust came with conditions, the museum could lose much more than an artifact. It could lose the story it had told the world for generations. The Saravan Cultural Council had spent years arguing exactly that. Their historians believed the relic had never been sold. Their legal advisors believed the museum's claim rested on a mistranslation. Their community had watched as an object tied to their own history, ceremonies, and ancestors became a centerpiece in a foreign institution. The council was not coming to Arden Museum for a polite visit. They were coming to demand answers. Mercer knew that better than anyone. He also knew that if Nadia's interpretation was correct, the charter could become evidence against him. He tried to dismiss her without appearing cruel. He said that ancient texts were filled with ambiguity. He suggested that memories of a parent's research could become distorted over time. He described Nadia's observations as interesting, but incomplete, the kind of thing that should be left to trained professionals. To anyone who did not know him, it might have sounded reasonable, but Nadia heard the message beneath it. You do not belong in this room. You do not understand what you are touching. You should be grateful that we are even listening. For a moment, she felt the old instinct disappear. She had felt it in school when teachers saw the name of the youth shelter on her records. She had felt it at social service offices when adults spoke over her as though she were a problem waiting to be processed. She had felt it at job interviews when people looked at her carefully repaired shoes and decided not to ask another question. Her mother had once told her that poor people were often expected to be grateful just for being allowed inside a room. But Elena had also told her something else. When someone becomes uncomfortable because of a question, that question is usually worth asking. Nadia opened her backpack. Inside was an old leather notebook. The cover had cracked at the corners. Several pages were held together by faded thread. The notebook had traveled with Nadia through every difficult year after her mother died. It had survived moves, shelters, temporary rooms, donated furniture, and nights when Nadia slept with it beneath her pillow because she was afraid someone might take it. To anyone else, it was only a worn book. To Nadia, it was the closest thing she had to hearing her mother's voice again. She opened it carefully. The pages were filled with copied symbols, restoration sketches, arrows, questions, and notes written in Elena Reyes's neat, steady handwriting. Some of the pages showed the Saravan Charter from different angles. Others contained close studies of the border marks. One page held a rough drawing of a narrow triangular fragment, its edges covered with small symbols. Near the bottom, Elena had written 3 words. Third fragment missing. Mercer saw the page, and this time his reaction was impossible to miss. His face did not collapse. He did not confess. He did not make the kind of mistake people made in dramatic stories when fear became too large to hide. Instead, he went still. For a man like Mercer, stillness was more revealing than panic. Owen saw it first. Evelyn saw it next. The junior scholars looked from the notebook to Mercer, unsure why a few handwritten words had changed the entire mood of the room. Nadia explained that her mother had always believed the charter was incomplete. The main tablet contained the beginning and central terms of the agreement, but not the final condition. Without that ending, The document could be interpreted in ways that benefited the people holding it. But Elena had believed a third fragment existed, and she had believed it contained the part that mattered most. Mercer dismissed the notebook as private material with no official authority. He said that scattered notes and old sketches could not be treated as evidence. Then he turned toward Owen and instructed him to escort Nadia out of the museum. The command was quiet, direct, and final. It was the kind of order Mercer had given many times before. Most people obeyed him because they knew what happened when they did not. Careers could stall, invitations could disappear, research funding could dry up. A single bad impression from the head of a department could follow a person for years. But Owen did not move. He had spent most of his working life following instructions. Security work taught people to respect procedure. You checked badges, you followed the chain of command, you kept order. You did not insert yourself into conversations that belonged to people with more education, more money, or more authority. But as Owen looked at Nadia holding her mother's notebook, he understood that this was not about procedure. It was about whether someone with less power deserved to be heard. "I think we should verify her claim first," he said. The sentence was simple, but it changed the room. Mercer turned toward him with open irritation. A security guard was not supposed to interrupt an academic dispute. He was supposed to stand near the door and remain invisible. Owen did not look away. Evelyn made the decision before Mercer could respond. She said Nadia would stay. No one would remove her from the building. No documents connected to Elena Reyes would be taken out of the museum. And no final presentation would be given to the Cerevan Council until the old research records had been reviewed. Mercer tried to protest. Evelyn stopped him. She took the notebook from Nadia and studied the sketch of the triangular fragment. The shape appeared to fit along the lower edge of the Cerevan Charter. Elena's handwriting was old, but the detail was precise. This was not the careless scribbling of someone guessing at a mystery. It was the work of a person who had spent long hours looking at something everyone else had ignored. Then another folded page slipped from the notebook. It fell onto the marble floor. Owen bent down and picked it up. The paper had yellowed with age. Most of it had been torn away, leaving only the bottom section intact. But that was enough. At the lower edge was a red administrative note. Further review suspended pending departmental authorization. Below it was a signature. Dr. Julian Mercer. Owen handed the page to Evelyn. She read it once, then again. Mercer said the report had been preliminary. He said Elena had raised questions that could not be proven at the time. He said the department had been under pressure. The evidence had been incomplete, and the suspension had been a normal professional decision. But his explanation did not answer the real question. Why had the review been suspended instead of completed? Why had the final pages gone missing? Why had the museum continued to present the charter as proof of ownership after one of its own researchers raised doubts? And why had Mercer reacted with fear when Nadia mentioned the third fragment? Evelyn looked at the old note in her hand. Then she asked Owen to take Nadia to the archive room beneath the museum. The archive was not part of the public Arden Museum. Visitors saw marble floors, bright galleries, climate-controlled display cases, and carefully chosen labels. The archive was where the less polished history lived. It sat below the galleries behind gray doors and narrow corridors. Metal shelves held old photographs, personnel files, maintenance records, restoration logs, rejected reports, and documents that had not been touched in years. It smelled of dust, paper, cardboard, and cold metal. For Nadia, it felt strangely familiar. Her mother had once worked in rooms like that. Not under gallery lights, not beside wealthy donors. In spaces where people handled broken objects, sorted fragments, and tried to restore what time had damaged. Owen switched on the lights. Rows of shelves stretched ahead of them. At first, Nadia found only small traces of Elena. Her name appeared in old staff rosters, payroll forms, inventory lists, and repair schedules. She was described as a technician, an assistant, a support employee. Never a researcher. Never a contributor. Never someone who had asked questions important enough to threaten the museum's official story. The absence hurt more than Nadia expected. It was one thing to know that her mother had been dismissed. It was another to see how completely her work had been erased. Owen searched through boxes marked with old project names. Nadia moved slowly between cabinets, checking dates and labels. The Saravan Charter had been studied in several phases over the years. The museum had recorded every restoration material, every temperature change, every crack, every photograph. Yet somehow, the final fragment had vanished from the story. Then Nadia found a photograph. It had been taken during an excavation exhibit opening 12 years earlier. Dr. Mercer stood near the center, younger but instantly recognizable, smiling beside donors, visiting scholars, and senior museum officials. Near the edge of the picture, almost cut off by the frame, stood Elena Reyes. She was holding a padded tray. On the tray were several clay fragments. One of them was narrow and triangular. Nadia placed the photograph beside the sketch from her mother's notebook. The shapes matched. The third fragment had existed. It had been found with the charter, and at some point, it had been removed from the official record. Owen searched another shelf and found a large storage box labeled Saravan Restoration Project, 2014 to 2016. Inside were folders of condition reports, photographs, correspondence, and maintenance forms. Several gaps appeared where files should have been. Empty spaces between folders suggested that someone had removed documents long ago. But at the bottom of the box, beneath a stack of old storage logs, Owen found an envelope. Elena Reyes's handwriting covered the front. Nadia stared at it for several seconds before touching it. The envelope had survived 12 years in the museum's basement. It had survived staff changes, renovations, storage moves, and whatever effort had been made to erase Elena's work. Somehow, it had remained hidden among files no one thought important enough to destroy. Inside was a partial report. The first page carried Elena's name. The second page described the same border marks Nadia had identified in the lobby. The third page argued that the charter might be a custodial agreement rather than a transfer of ownership. The fourth page mentioned a detached fragment that could contain the final condition of the covenant. And at the bottom, in the same red ink, was the same instruction. Further review suspended. Nadia read the pages again and again. The words were not dramatic. Elena had not written with anger. She had written carefully, professionally, and with the restraint of someone who knew that evidence mattered more than emotion. But between the lines, Nadia could see her mother's loneliness. Elena had been right. She had known something was wrong. She had tried to tell people with the authority to investigate. And someone had made sure the investigation stopped. Nadia thought about the last years of her mother's life. After losing her job at Arden Museum, Elena had taken whatever work she could find. She restored damaged books for a small shop across town. She cleaned offices at night. She repaired old furniture. She translated simple letters and labels for community groups. She never returned to academic conferences. She never received another museum position. She became quieter, more tired, and more careful about what she said. But she never stopped studying. Some nights, Nadia would wake up and see light beneath the kitchen door. Her mother would be sitting at the table with a cup of cold tea, copying symbols into the leather notebook. She had never spoken much about Mercer. She had never explained exactly why she had been forced out. But once, when Nadia was still young, she had asked why her mother kept working on something that had already caused so much pain. Elena had looked up from the page and said, "The truth does not stop being true, just because powerful people are tired of hearing it." Nadia had been too young to understand. Standing in the archive room with the report in her hands, she understood at last. Evelyn arrived a few minutes later. She had been trying to keep the museum from falling apart upstairs. The Saravan Council's cars had already been seen outside. Board members were gathering in the reception hall. The legal team had asked for an update. Donors were beginning to notice that the scheduled presentation had been delayed. But when Evelyn read Elena's report, the urgent noise of the building seemed to fade. She read it once as an administrator looking for liability. Then she read it again as a person trying to understand how an institution had allowed one woman's work to disappear. The report was not reckless. It was not speculative in the careless sense Mercer had claimed. Elena had documented her observations. She had included comparative references. She had outlined what needed to be tested. She had not demanded that the museum surrender the relic immediately. She had simply asked for the truth to be examined. Evelyn looked at Nadia. For the first time that day, Nadia was no longer an unwanted visitor, a shelter girl, or an inconvenience at the worst possible moment. She was the only person in the building carrying evidence everyone else had ignored. A message came through Evelyn's phone. The Saravan Cultural Council had arrived, and somewhere inside Arden Museum, hidden beneath a false label or a forgotten display case, was the missing fragment that could expose everything Julian Mercer had spent 12 years trying to bury. The Saravan Cultural Council entered Arden Museum without anger, spectacle, or raised voices. They did not need any of those things. Their presence alone unsettled the building. The delegation included historians, preservation specialists, legal advisors, and Professor Layla Rahman, one of the most respected scholars of ancient Saravan language and law. They had traveled for years through archives, private collections, old shipping documents, and the scattered records of expeditions that had removed objects from their homeland. For generations, people from Saravan had watched museums around the world display pieces of their culture. Sacred objects had been taken from temples, burial sites, family archives, and ceremonial grounds. They had been transported across oceans, assigned new catalog numbers, placed beneath foreign lighting, and described in languages their creators would never have recognized. The world often called that preservation, but preservation without consent could become another form of theft. The Saravan Council had come to Arden Museum because the charter mattered. It was not only a tablet, it was the legal memory of an agreement made during a time of violence and uncertainty. The relic connected to it had been treated as a trophy by the museum, but to the Saravan people, it was something else entirely. It represented continuity. It represented survival. It represented a promise made by their ancestors that no institution had the right to rewrite. Dr. Mercer greeted the delegation in the reception hall with the calm professionalism that had made him famous. His voice was smooth. His posture was controlled. He intended to lead them into the presentation room, show them the museum's official interpretation, and reassure the board that everything remained under control. But Evelyn interrupted before the briefing could begin. She informed the council that new archival material had been discovered and that the museum could not ethically present a final translation until the evidence had been reviewed. Mercer's frustration appeared only briefly. To most people, he still looked composed. But Layla Rahman noticed. She had spent decades working with scholars, collectors, politicians, and museum leaders. She knew the difference between uncertainty and concealment. She knew when a person was trying to protect truth and when a person was trying to protect a reputation. Then she saw the old leather notebook in Nadia's hands. Layla stopped walking. Her eyes moved to the cracked cover, then to the faint handwriting visible on the open page. For a moment, her expression changed from professional caution to something more personal. "Elena Reyes," she said quietly. I knew her name. Nadia looked up. The room seemed to narrow around those words. Years earlier, before Elena had been forced out of Arden Museum, she had contacted Professor Layla Rahman. Elena had asked questions about the structure of old Saravan custodial agreements. She had sent a short letter describing the border marks on the charter. Layla had replied with several sources and asked for more photographs. Then the correspondence stopped. Layla had never known why. She had assumed Elena had been discouraged. She had assumed the museum had chosen a different direction. She had assumed, as people often assumed when someone disappeared quietly from an institution, that the person must have made a mistake. Now, seeing Nadia, the notebook, and the partial report, Layla understood what had really happened. Elena had been silenced. Nadia showed her the report from the archive, the old photograph, and the sketch of the triangular fragment. Layla examined them carefully. She did not rush to make a grand claim. She asked questions. She compared dates. She looked at the handwriting. She studied the directional markings drawn by Elena beside the tablet. Then she said that the evidence deserved to be taken seriously. That was enough. For the first time, Mercer was no longer controlling the conversation. Nadia remembered another detail from the notebook. The sketch of the missing fragment had been drawn beside a rough outline of the museum's upper gallery. Her mother had written a short sentence beneath it, one Nadia had never fully understood. The final promise was moved where no one would think to read it. Nadia thought of the photograph she had found in the archive. Behind Elena and Mercer, almost hidden by the group of donors, had been a familiar display case. It stood in the upper gallery beside a bronze ceremonial mask. Nadia remembered seeing it years ago when her mother had once brought her to the museum before everything changed. The clue had been there all along. The group moved toward the upper gallery. Mercer tried to stop them without seeming like he was stopping them. He argued that the museum should follow established procedure. He said the council should not be drawn into an internal archival disagreement. He suggested that the search for a missing fragment could take days, perhaps weeks, and that it would be irresponsible to make conclusions before the proper team had examined every record. But his argument only made Evelyn more certain. A man who believed the fragment did not matter would not be trying so hard to delay the search. The upper gallery was quieter than the rest of the museum. Most visitors had been redirected because of the unexpected meeting. Rain darkened the tall windows, turning the city outside into a blurred gray landscape. The bronze ceremonial mask sat behind glass at the center of the room, its surface reflecting faint gold light. Beside it was a small display case containing several fragments that had been labeled as decorative objects of uncertain origin. One of them was triangular. It was smaller than Nadia expected, smaller than the fear it had caused, smaller than the years of silence built around it. It rested on dark velvet beneath a short museum label that made it sound meaningless. Decorative clay fragment, origin uncertain. Nadia stood before the glass and felt something cold move through her chest. For 12 years, the truth had been sitting in plain sight. Visitors had walked past it. Scholars had walked past it. Donors had walked past it. Mercer had walked past it every day, knowing exactly what it was. The conservator carefully opened the case. The fragment was removed and placed beside a high-resolution image of the Saravan Charter. The shape aligned with the lower border. The clay composition looked similar. The small directional marks along one edge matched the signs Nadia had identified on the main tablet. Professor Layla leaned closer. Then she looked at Nadia. "It fits," she said. The words carried through the gallery. Mercer immediately tried to dismiss the discovery. He said that fragments could be misleading. He said that similar clay did not establish legal meaning. He said that objects from the same region could resemble each other without belonging together. But Evelyn had already requested the old catalog records. A staff member arrived with digital copies from the museum database. The history of the triangular fragment appeared on the screen. Years earlier, it had been listed as part of the Saravan Restoration Project. Then, 11 years before, its catalog number had been changed. Its link to the charter had been removed. Its classification had been rewritten. Instead of a missing section of a legal tablet, it had become a decorative fragment of uncertain origin. The authorization belonged to Dr. Julian Mercer. This time, no explanation could make the fact disappear. The fragment was taken to the research wing under the supervision of the conservator, Layla, Evelyn, and members of the Saravan Council. The charter was brought from its secure case and placed beneath specialized imaging equipment. Scholars gathered around the monitors. Lawyers stood near the doorway. Board members arrived quietly, their faces pale as they realized the museum's crisis was no longer private. Nadia stood at the edge of the room with her mother's notebook held against her chest. The same people who had ignored her in the lobby were now waiting for the evidence she had led them to reveal itself. At first, the scan showed only dark clay, scratches, and the cloudy residue of an old protective coating. The conservator adjusted the lighting frequency. The image sharpened slowly. A faint line appeared, then another. Then a sequence of symbols emerged beneath the surface, running along the narrow edge of the fragment. The room became completely still. The missing ending had been found. Professor Layla did not translate immediately. She examined the image with care. She compared the symbols to the border marks on the main charter. She followed the Guardian's path Nadia had identified. She corrected the orientation. She checked the grammar against old Saravan legal forms. It was not a miracle. It was evidence finally being allowed to speak. The charter did not describe the sacred relic as something purchased. It did not grant permanent ownership to anyone outside the Saravan community. It described the relic as an entrusted object, placed in the care of guardians during a period of danger. Those guardians had a duty to preserve it. They had a duty to protect it. And when recognized representatives of the Saravan people came forward to request its return, the agreement required the guardians to give it back. Then Layla reached the final sentence. Her voice softened as she translated the last words. The guardian who conceals this covenant, alters its meaning, or refuses the rightful return, forfeits all claim to hold what was never theirs. The words settled over the room like a verdict. The Arden Museum had never owned the relic. It had only been trusted with it, and its right to hold it had ended the moment it chose secrecy over truth. No one spoke for several seconds. The members of the Saravan Council stood quietly before the monitor. Their faces carried emotions that did not need explanation. Some looked angry. Some looked exhausted. One older historian closed his eyes, as though he had spent years waiting for the chance to hear those words spoken aloud. For them, the translation was not only a legal victory, it was proof that their ancestors had not been forgotten. The agreement had survived. The language had survived. The truth had survived, even after generations of people tried to bury it beneath labels, glass cases, and institutional certainty. Nadia looked toward Mercer. She remembered how he had looked at her when she first entered the lobby. He had seen a wet jacket, worn shoes, a torn backpack, and a girl from a shelter. He had assumed that was enough information to decide whether she mattered. He had thought he could dismiss her with polished words. He had thought Elena's name had been erased. He had thought the fragment was hidden safely behind a false label. But now the entire room was looking at him. Evelyn stepped forward with Elena's report in her hands. "Dr. Mercer, you are suspended pending an independent investigation." Mercer tried to argue that the museum could not make such a decision based on a single translation. He claimed that the council was interpreting incomplete evidence. He insisted that catalog changes could have administrative explanations. He tried to make the truth sound complicated again, because complication had protected him for years. But the evidence was no longer a single translation. It was 12 years of hidden reports. It was altered catalog records. It was a missing fragment reclassified under his authorization. It was Elena's research. It was Nadia's notebook. It was the fear on his face every time someone came too close to what he had done. No one came to defend him. The scholars who had once treated him as untouchable stood in silence. The board members avoided his eyes. The legal team began collecting documents. The Saravan Council watched with the calm dignity of people who had waited too long for the truth to be acknowledged. Mercer's career did not collapse because he lacked intelligence. It collapsed because he believed intelligence gave him the right to decide which truths mattered. He had silenced Elena because she had less power than he did. He had buried her work because it threatened his reputation. He had hidden the fragment because it threatened the museum's claim. And he had dismissed Nadia because he believed a girl from a shelter could never challenge a man with titles, money, and influence. But the truth had returned through the daughter of the woman he tried to erase. The investigation that followed was larger than anyone expected. Arden Museum announced a complete independent review of the Saravan collection. The sacred relic was removed from public display and placed under joint care, while arrangements were made for its return. The museum agreed to work with the Saravan Cultural Council to review every artifact connected to the original expedition. More documents were found in the weeks that followed. There were internal emails showing that Mercer had discouraged staff from revisiting Elena's work. There were catalog revisions with no proper explanation. There were notes from meetings where concerns about ownership had been minimized because donors had invested heavily in the Saravan exhibit. Mercer had not acted alone in every decision, but he had been the person with the power to make silence look official. His suspension became permanent. His academic appointments were reviewed. His published work was questioned. The museum removed his name from several public materials while the investigation continued. The punishment was not dramatic in the way people expected from stories. There was no public shouting. No one dragged him through the lobby. No one needed to. The truth did something more lasting. It took away the authority he had used to control others. The museum issued a public correction. Elena Reyes's name was restored to the official history of the Saravan Charter. Her report was digitized, preserved, and acknowledged as the first internal research to identify the document as a custodial covenant rather than a transfer of ownership. For years, her work had existed only in a worn notebook and a hidden envelope. Now it became part of the record. A research grant was created in Elena Reyes's name for young people from underrepresented communities who wanted to study history, languages, preservation, archaeology, and cultural heritage. The museum's board did not create the grant because it could erase the past. Nothing could do that. They created it because the future had to become different. Nadia did not become rich overnight. She did not suddenly appear on magazine covers or receive a perfect new life from strangers who had ignored her before. That would not have been honest. Her problems did not disappear because one day changed everything. But the day did change the direction of her life. She received a paid internship with the joint Serivan-Arden Preservation Project. The position came with transportation support, educational guidance, and stable housing assistance through a youth transition program. For the first time in a long time, Nadia had a place to go that did not feel temporary. She also had a future that did not depend on someone else deciding she belonged. Professor Layla became one of her mentors. She did not treat Nadia as a miracle or a symbol. She treated her as a young person with knowledge, patience, and a deep connection to the work her mother had begun. She taught Nadia how to verify evidence, how to question assumptions, and how to let facts speak louder than anger. Nadia listened carefully, but she never forgot the lesson she had already learned from Elena. Sometimes the most important thing a person can do is refuse to let the truth become invisible. Months later, Nadia returned to the archive room beneath Arden Museum. The room still smelled of dust, paper, and old metal shelves, but it no longer felt like a place where forgotten stories were buried. A new workstation had been set up near the window. There were digitization tools, preservation folders, and neatly labeled boxes waiting to be cataloged. Nadia entered with her own identification badge. This time, she did not come through the side door hoping someone would let her stay. She belonged there. On her desk sat her mother's old leather notebook beside a new archival folder. The label read, Elena Reyes Collection. Nadia opened the notebook to the first page. There, in faded handwriting, was a sentence her mother had written years before. The truth is often hidden in the part everyone else ignores. For years, Nadia had thought those words were only about old symbols and forgotten documents. Now she understood that they were about people too. They were about the quiet worker no one bothered to credit. They were about the poor girl no one thought was worth listening to. They were about the community whose history had been carried away and renamed by strangers. They were about the small fragment everyone walked past because they had already decided it could not matter. The world often judges people by clothes, titles, money, addresses, and appearances. But wisdom does not always arrive wearing the shape people expect. Sometimes it comes carrying a torn backpack. Sometimes it stands quietly in the rain. And sometimes, the person everyone overlooks is the one carrying the truth that changes everything. At Halston's charity gala, 15-year-old Noah Bennett was accused of stealing the library's most valuable book. They dragged him forward. Everyone watched in silence.
You were trusted here.
Conrad wanted a confession.
What did you think would happen?
Noah refused to lie.
I did not steal it.
The room believed Conrad.
Then explain why you were hiding it.
But Noah had found it.
I found it in a crate.
Because the original was missing.
The original never left this library.
Then Evelyn stepped forward.
Don't let them take that book.
She knew the truth. The displayed book was fake.
The book under glass is a forgery.
Conrad finally looked afraid.
Be careful what you accuse me of.
He did not steal history. He found what you buried.
To understand why, go back 6 weeks. 6 weeks earlier, the Halston Heritage Library had not yet become the center of a scandal. It was still only an old public building on the east side of the city, standing between a bus station and a row of stores that changed owners every few years. Its limestone walls were stained by decades of rain. Its copper roof had darkened almost black. In winter, the pipes groaned beneath the floorboards, and in summer, the upper reading room carried the warm scent of dust, cedar shelves, old paper, and leather bindings that had survived longer than most of the people who once touched them. To wealthy people driving past in black cars, the library looked tired. It occupied valuable land near the river, close to luxury apartments, boutique hotels, and polished glass towers that had begun changing Halston beyond recognition. To developers, it was a property with potential. To city officials, it was a budget problem. To men like Conrad Vale, it was an opportunity waiting to be renamed. But to the people who used it every day, the library was something else entirely. Children came after school because it was quiet, safe, and warm. Older men came because they had nowhere else to sit after retirement. Mothers came to use the computers for job applications. Teenagers came to study, read, hide from arguments at home, or simply spend a few hours in a place where no one expected them to explain why life had become difficult. The library did not ask for proof of income. It did not care where a person slept. It did not demand that anyone explain their past before opening its doors. That was why Evelyn Hart had stayed there for so long. At 57, Evelyn had become the kind of woman people overlooked until they needed something only she could find. She was not loud. She did not dress to be noticed. Her gray-brown hair was always pinned neatly behind her head, and she wore thin cotton gloves whenever she handled old paper. Her clothes were simple, practical, and slightly old-fashioned. She moved through the archive rooms with careful, measured steps, as though every shelf held a memory that deserved respect. Officially, Evelyn was the library's senior archival assistant. It was a title that made her sound like someone who spent her days dusting books and filing records. In truth, she knew more about Halston's history than most of the men who gave speeches about it. She could identify a forged signature by the pressure of the ink. She could tell the age of a document by the fibers in its paper. She knew which streets had vanished beneath new construction, which neighborhoods had been renamed by investors, and which public promises had disappeared the moment money changed hands. Evelyn had built her life around those small traces, because 20 years earlier, she had learned what happened when powerful people believed they could erase them. Before coming to the library, Evelyn had been a forensic auditor for the city of Halston. She had worked in the municipal finance office, reviewing redevelopment budgets, public grants, housing contracts, and infrastructure programs. She had been good at her work. Too good, perhaps, for people who preferred financial reports to remain unread. At the time, Halston had been changing quickly. Old neighborhoods near the river were being cleared for redevelopment. Public housing projects were being repaired, relocated, or quietly abandoned. New foundations appeared every year, promising to rebuild struggling communities. Politicians praised private investment. Newspapers printed photographs of smiling developers standing beside ribbon cuttings and construction sites. One of those developers was Conrad Vale. Even then, Conrad had known how to make ambition sound like compassion. He was younger, hungrier, and far less famous than he would become. But the city already admired him. He spoke about restoring dignity to forgotten neighborhoods. He donated coats during winter drives. He appeared at school fundraisers. He made people feel that Halston's future depended on men like him. Evelyn had not disliked him at first. She had only followed the numbers. The more she reviewed the finances connected to the city's redevelopment programs, the more she noticed patterns that made no sense. Public funds intended for housing repairs were being transferred into charitable accounts. Those accounts paid consulting fees to private firms. The firms were connected to contractors. The contractors were connected to land purchases. The land purchases eventually led back to companies linked to Conrad Vale and his earliest business partners. Nothing had been stolen in one obvious act. That was what made the scheme so difficult to see. The money moved in fragments. It passed through foundations with hopeful names. It was hidden inside consulting contracts, administrative costs, redevelopment fees, and emergency transfers. Each transaction looked harmless by itself. But when Evelyn placed them beside one another, a pattern appeared. Public money was being used to help private interests control public land. Evelyn needed proof before she could report it. She needed someone who understood the city's old records, someone who knew where the original deeds and transfer documents had been stored. That person was Arthur Bennett. Arthur had been a municipal records clerk, quiet, patient, and almost invisible to the people who worked above him. He had no powerful friends. He had no political ambition. He was the kind of man who remembered the exact shelf where a file had been placed 15 years earlier, even after 3 office moves and 2 changes in the archive system. Arthur had recognized the same irregularities Evelyn had found. Several land transfer records had been altered. Dates had been changed. Property classifications had shifted after signatures were supposedly completed. Documents had appeared in folders where they did not belong. Some records carried seals that had not existed at the dates printed on them. Together, Evelyn and Arthur had come close to exposing the truth. Then the documents began disappearing. Before Evelyn could deliver her final report, she was accused of manipulating city financial records. The same spreadsheets she had used to uncover fraud were suddenly presented as evidence against her. Money that had vanished through a complicated network of transfers was blamed on her department. The city needed someone to absorb the scandal, and Evelyn was convenient. She was not wealthy. She was not politically connected. She had no family name that could frighten the people accusing her. Arthur tried to defend her. He submitted notes about altered deeds and missing evidence. He insisted that files had been removed from the archive system. But his warnings were dismissed as paranoia. He was removed from his job. His reputation was damaged. Within months, the city had painted Evelyn as a dishonest auditor, and Arthur as a troubled clerk, unable to accept the conclusions of the investigation. Conrad Vale survived untouched. In fact, he emerged stronger. Over the next 2 decades, his company grew. Vale Horizons built luxury towers, shopping centers, private hospitals, and waterfront districts. Conrad funded scholarships. He donated to museums. He sponsored youth programs. His name appeared on plaques across the city. And Evelyn disappeared. She took temporary work restoring documents. She cataloged private collections. She repaired damaged books. Eventually, the Halston Heritage Library hired her, because old paper did not care what the newspapers had once said about her. The library was one of the few places where she could work without hearing whispers whenever she entered a room. For 20 years, Evelyn had not tried to fight her past. She had survived it. Then Conrad Vale announced that he wanted to save the library. The proposal arrived with headlines, television interviews, and photographs of Conrad standing beneath the library's stone archway, while promising a new future for Halston's children. Vale Horizons would invest $40 million into a modern educational complex called the Vale Center for Tomorrow. The plan included a technology wing, a media lab, a scholarship center, a renovated children's library, and a sleek glass structure extending toward the river. The city celebrated before most people read the details. The mayor praised Conrad's generosity. The library board called it a miracle. Newspapers described the project as a lifeline for an aging institution that could no longer survive on public funding alone. People who had never visited the library suddenly had opinions about how it should be transformed. But Evelyn saw what the others did not. The agreement required the city to lease the library property to Vale Horizons for 99 years. The library itself would remain open, at least in theory. But much of the surrounding land would be converted into private retail space, corporate offices, luxury cafes, and event halls. The old building would become the decorative center of a much larger commercial project. It would survive as an image, not as a promise. Evelyn understood the danger immediately. A public library did not belong to the city officials who happened to manage it. It belonged to the people who needed it. And once the land was given to a private company for nearly a century, there would be no easy way to take it back. She began studying the legal documents late at night. Most of the agreement had been carefully written by expensive lawyers. But near the end of the planning folder, hidden behind technical maps and development schedules, Evelyn found an amendment dated 1978. It claimed that the original terms of the library's founding agreement had been changed decades earlier, allowing the city to transfer the property for private development under certain conditions. At first glance, the document looked convincing. The language was formal. The seal appeared official. The pages were yellowed enough to suggest age. The signatures looked authentic. It was exactly the sort of paper most people accepted without question, because it looked old and complicated. But Evelyn had spent too long studying the small places where lies failed. The seal at the bottom of the amendment belonged to a municipal archive classification system created in 1986. The paper contained a fiber blend that had not been used in city documents during the 1970s. The typeface was correct for the era, but the spacing between lines matched a template introduced years later. The document claimed to have been filed in 1978, yet the reference number followed a code system that did not exist until the late 80s. Someone had created an old lie using new tools. That night, Evelyn sat alone in her small apartment on Grant Street, surrounded by copied documents and handwritten notes. Trucks rumbled below her window. The laundromat downstairs had closed hours earlier, leaving the building quiet except for the low hum of old machines. A mug of tea cooled beside her lamp as she compared the forged amendment to real city records. The more she studied it, the more certain she became. Someone was trying to steal the library without calling it theft. The next morning, Evelyn brought her findings to Martin Gage, the library director. Martin was not a bad man. He had spent years trying to keep the library open through funding cuts, staff reductions, and public indifference. He had the tired face of someone who had learned to celebrate every small victory, because larger victories no longer seemed possible. Evelyn explained the inconsistencies. She showed him the mismatched archive seal. She pointed out the paper fibers, the date problem, and the wrong filing system. Martin listened. He looked uneasy. He turned the pages slowly. Then he told her that the city legal department had already approved the agreement. Conrad Vale's team had spent months preparing the proposal. The library board had accepted the documents as legitimate. Martin suggested that Evelyn might be viewing the situation through the pain of what had happened to her years earlier. He did not accuse her of lying. That would have been easier. Instead, he implied that her past had made her suspicious of everything. Evelyn left his office without arguing. Downstairs, in the reading room, Noah Bennett was sorting returned books onto a cart. He was 15, thin, dark-haired, and taller than people expected when they first saw him. His clothes were clean but worn. The sleeves of his jacket had frayed at the cuffs, and his shoes had been repaired with black tape near the soles. Noah had been coming to the library for nearly a year. He lived in a foster home on the other side of Halston, with a couple who were doing their best, but already had too many responsibilities. There were other children in the house, too many rules, and not enough quiet. Noah had moved through 4 placements in 6 years. He had learned not to unpack fully. He had learned not to ask whether a room was really his. He had learned that adults often said they wanted honesty, but only when honesty was easy to hear. At the library, no one asked him to explain himself. He volunteered after school. He organized donations, repaired loose book covers, helped older patrons use the computers, and spent hours reading local history. He liked maps, old newspapers, photographs, land records, and anything that revealed how the city had become what it was. He liked history, because history proved that people had existed even when the world tried to forget them. Evelyn had noticed him long before they became friends. At first, Noah had been another quiet boy sitting alone near the window. But then he began asking questions that surprised her. He wanted to know why old books sometimes had handwritten notes in the margins. He wanted to know why city maps showed streets that no longer existed. He wanted to know who decided what was worth preserving. One afternoon, Noah brought Evelyn a small brass key. It was heavy for its size, with a worn oval head and a symbol engraved near the shaft. The symbol looked like a lantern inside a circle. Noah explained that the key had belonged to his grandfather, Arthur Bennett. It was one of only 2 things Noah had left from him, along with an old photograph. When Evelyn looked at the photograph, the past reached out and took hold of her. Arthur Bennett stood beside a younger woman in an office filled with file boxes and folders. The woman wore a navy blouse and had dark hair pulled back from her face. She looked focused, determined, and far less tired than Evelyn remembered feeling during those years. The woman was Evelyn. For several seconds, she could not speak. Noah had never known the full story about his grandfather. He only knew that Arthur had worked for the city, had always spoken about truth, and had died before Noah was old enough to understand why adults avoided mentioning his name. Evelyn turned the brass key over in her gloved hand. The lantern symbol belonged to an old archival system. Before Halston digitized most sensitive records, certain files had been stored in locked cabinets beneath the library. The cabinet numbers were rarely listed in public records. Only longtime municipal employees knew they existed. That evening, after the public rooms closed, Evelyn took Noah down to the lower archive level. The basement corridor was narrow and cold. The lights hummed overhead. The stone walls carried the scent of damp paper and old dust. At the far end of the hallway stood several metal cabinets that had not been opened in years. Most were rusted. Some were sealed with outdated evidence labels. One cabinet bore the same lantern symbol as Noah's key, almost hidden beneath layers of paint. Noah placed the key in the lock. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the mechanism turned. Inside, they found a cardboard box tied with brittle twine, several reels of microfilm, a packet of photographs, and a sealed envelope with Arthur Bennett's name written across the front in faded blue ink. Evelyn knew she should have contacted the city archives office immediately. She knew the rules. She knew the procedure. But when she saw Arthur's handwriting, she could not treat the moment like routine paperwork. The envelope contained a letter Arthur had written shortly before his death. It did not include a dramatic confession. It did not name every person involved. Arthur had been too careful for that. Instead, he wrote about fear. He wrote that the evidence they had found had been scattered, altered, and hidden in places no one would think to search. He wrote that Conrad Vale had never feared truth as much as he feared connections. A single document could be dismissed. A witness could be discredited. But if the old records were placed beside one another, they would reveal what had been done. Arthur believed the truth was still alive. It had simply been buried beneath the things powerful people considered worthless. At the bottom of the letter, he had left a sequence of dates, symbols, and file references. Evelyn recognized the system immediately. They were cross-references to municipal filings, redevelopment ledgers, library trust records, and financial documents connected to a charitable foundation that no longer officially existed. The name on the foundation was Vale Community Futures. It was one of Conrad Vale's first philanthropic organizations. Over the following days, Evelyn and Noah worked quietly. Noah helped copy reference codes, organize old files, and compare public records with the materials Arthur had left behind. He did not complain about the boring work. He had Arthur's patience in him, though he did not yet understand how deeply his grandfather had shaped him. Together, they found proof that the library land had never belonged to the city in the ordinary way. The property had been donated in 1912 by Margaret Halston, whose family had funded the original building. Her founding trust included a condition that had slowly disappeared from public summaries over the decades. The land had been given for permanent community use. It could not be sold, leased, transferred, or converted into a private commercial project. If the city ever attempted to do so, ownership would automatically revert to an independent public trust established by Margaret Halston herself. The entire Vale Horizons project depended on that condition remaining hidden, and the condition was recorded inside the original Founders Register. The Founders Register was an enormous leather-bound ledger stored in the library's climate-controlled vault. It contained the names of the original trustees, the first donations, the land agreement, and Margaret Halston's handwritten founding conditions. 3 days after Evelyn and Noah discovered the clause, the library board announced that the Founders Register would be displayed as the centerpiece of the upcoming Halston Heritage Gala. The gala was being promoted as a celebration of the library's future. Conrad Vale would be honored as the man who had saved the building. Donors, politicians, reporters, and business leaders would gather beneath the stained glass ceiling. The original register would be placed under glass as a symbol of the library's history and its bright new beginning. Evelyn read the announcement twice. Then she went to the vault. The Founders Register was still on its shelf. At first, she almost felt relieved. The leather cover was the right color. The gold lettering appeared worn. The binding carried the same floral pattern. Everything looked exactly as it should. But Evelyn had handled the original register twice before in her career, and she remembered one small detail no copy could easily imitate. Near the lower corner of the true cover was a dark water stain left by the flood of 1947. The book in the vault had no stain. Evelyn stood perfectly still. Someone had already replaced the original. And somewhere inside Halston, Conrad Vale now had the one document that could destroy everything he was trying to build. Evelyn did not touch the false register again. until she had taken photographs of every detail that proved it was a replacement. She photographed the smooth lower corner where the flood stain should have been. She photographed the stitching along the spine, too even and too clean for a book more than a century old. She photographed the pages under angled light, revealing fibers that did not match paper made in 1912. Then she went to Martin Gage one last time. This time she did not arrive with a theory. She arrived with evidence. Martin listened behind the closed door of his office, while Evelyn laid the photographs across his desk. Outside, the library remained busy. Children moved through the reading room. A printer hummed near the public computers. Someone laughed softly near the circulation counter. The ordinary sounds made the conversation feel even more unreal. Evelyn explained that the founder's register in the vault was not genuine. She explained that the true book contained the original land condition, preventing the library property from being leased for private development. She showed him the forged amendment from 1978 and the archive details that proved it had been created years later. Martin did not deny that the evidence looked troubling, but he was afraid of what the truth would cost. The gala was only days away. Conrad Vale's foundation had already paid for the event. City officials had confirmed their attendance. Newspapers had promised coverage. The library board had built its entire future around the announcement of the Vale Center for tomorrow. If Evelyn was right, the project would not merely be delayed, it could collapse completely. Martin told her that accusing Conrad Vale without official proof would be reckless. He warned that the board would see her actions as sabotage. He said that the city could not survive another public scandal involving the library. Evelyn understood what he was really saying. He believed the library needed Conrad more than it needed the truth. That afternoon, she was placed on administrative suspension. The letter was written in polite language. It claimed that she had accessed restricted material without authorization and caused unnecessary disruption during an important institutional transition. She was instructed not to enter the archive rooms until further notice. For the second time in her life, Evelyn watched a powerful system turn procedure into punishment. The first time, she had been younger. She had still believed that someone would eventually step in and ask what had truly happened. This time, she knew better. She did not argue. She gathered her gloves, her notebook, and the few personal items she kept in her archive drawer. Then she walked through the library without saying goodbye to anyone. Most of the staff avoided looking at her. A few looked sorry. None of them stopped her. That was the part Evelyn would remember most clearly. Not the suspension letter, not Martin's fear, not even the knowledge that Conrad Vale had found a way to rewrite history inside the very building meant to preserve it. What she remembered was how easy it had been for people to remain silent when silence protected them. Noah learned about Evelyn's suspension the following day. He had arrived after school carrying a stack of returned books, unaware that he was no longer supposed to be there. The circulation desk employee told him quietly that his volunteer access had been paused. She would not explain why. At first, Noah thought it was because of Evelyn. Then the security supervisor approached him with a rare 19th century atlas in his hands. The atlas had been found beneath the table where Noah usually studied. It was one of the most valuable items in the special collection. Its pages were delicate, its maps hand-colored, and its cover embossed with the seal of the old Halston Survey Office. It should never have been left in the public reading room. Yet there it was, beneath Noah's chair, as though someone had placed it there specifically to be discovered. Noah said he had never touched it. The supervisor did not accuse him directly. He did something more damaging. He made it clear that the library could no longer trust him around valuable materials. Noah stood in the lobby holding the volunteer badge he had worn for almost a year. Around him, people continued walking past the front desk. Some glanced at him. Most did not. He knew what they saw. A foster kid with worn shoes. A quiet boy without parents beside him. Someone easy to blame because people already believed he probably had a reason to take what did not belong to him. By the end of the day, Noah had been barred from volunteering. He did not tell Evelyn immediately. He waited until evening, then went to her apartment on Grant Street, carrying the suspension letter from the library and the brass key that had belonged to Arthur Bennett. Rain had soaked the shoulders of his jacket. His hair clung to his forehead. He tried to act as though the letter did not matter, but Evelyn saw the way he held it. The library had been one of the only places where Noah had felt wanted without being examined. It had been a place where he could sit beside other people without worrying about whether they knew his history. A place where he could be useful. A place where his questions were welcomed. Now it had become another door closing in his face. Evelyn wanted to tell him that none of this was his fault, but she knew those words would not be enough. Instead, she showed him the evidence she had copied before leaving the archive. The photographs of the fake register, the forged 1978 amendment, Arthur's letter, the notes about the hidden land condition. She told him that the people responsible wanted both of them out of the way because they were getting too close. Noah listened without interrupting. Then he asked the question Evelyn had been trying not to ask herself. If Conrad Vale had taken the real register, where had he put it? The answer came the following morning. Noah had gone behind the library to throw away a bag of old newspapers for his foster mother. Near the recycling bins, he noticed several boxes from Vale Community Futures stacked beside the loading dock. Most were empty packaging from gala decorations, but one crumpled sheet of paper had blown loose from the top of a bin. It was a delivery manifest. The document listed several crates scheduled to arrive before the Halston Heritage Gala. One crate was marked as historical display material. Another carried a more private label, archival handling, restricted access. At the bottom of the page was a reference code. Noah did not recognize it. But when he brought the manifest to Evelyn, she went pale. The code matched one of the references Arthur Bennett had written beneath his letter. It was not a random number. It was an old city archive designation used for sensitive materials moved without public cataloging. The true Founders Register had not been destroyed. It was being transported, and Conrad Vale was planning to bring it into the library on the night of the gala. At first, Evelyn wanted Noah to stay away. She had already seen what Conrad's people were willing to do. They had planted the Atlas. They had turned the library staff against him. They had made him look suspicious before he had done anything wrong. But Noah had spent too much of his life being told to sit quietly while adults made choices that changed everything around him. He did not want to be reckless. He did not want revenge. He only wanted to stop someone from erasing the truth the way Arthur Bennett's truth had been erased. Evelyn understood that feeling better than anyone, so they made a plan. Evelyn would attend the gala even though she had not been invited. She would remain near the public entrance, where the press and city officials would be gathered. Noah would not confront Conrad. He would only look for the delivery crate and confirm whether the original register was inside. If he found it, he would not touch it. He would send Evelyn a message. The plan sounded simple, but nothing involving Conrad Vale had ever been simple. On the night of the gala, the Halston Heritage Library no longer looked like itself. The children's tables had been removed. The public computers were covered in black cloth. White flowers stood in silver vases beneath the marble staircase. A long carpet stretched through the main reading room, where students usually sat with notebooks and tired parents usually searched for work online. The library had become a ballroom. Guests in tuxedos and gowns arrived beneath strings of warm lights. City officials posed for photographs. Donors drank champagne beneath the stained glass ceiling. A small orchestra played near the old reference desk. At the center of the room, beneath a narrow beam of light, the fake Founders Register rested inside a glass display case. Conrad Vale stood nearby in a black dinner jacket, wearing a silver pin shaped like an open book. He smiled for cameras. He greeted politicians by name. He spoke about education, opportunity, and the future of Halston, with the ease of a man who had spent his life learning how to make people believe that wealth and goodness were the same thing. The guests loved him. They saw the billionaire who had promised $40 million. They saw the philanthropist who wanted to save an old library. They saw the man who had built towers, schools, foundations, and a reputation so polished that few people remembered what might be hidden beneath it. They did not see the forged amendment. They did not see the stolen register. They did not see the evidence Arthur Bennett had hidden 20 years earlier. Noah entered through the service corridor shortly before the main speech began. He wore a borrowed Navy suit that was slightly too large at the shoulders. The sleeves were long. The shoes hurt his feet. His tie was not perfectly straight. He looked like a boy trying to belong in a room built for people who had never been told that they did not. Near the loading area, behind temporary catering stations and stacks of wine boxes, Noah found the crate marked for private archival handling. The Vale Community Futures logo was stamped across the side. His heart began to race. The crate had been placed behind a curtain beside flower supplies and event equipment. It was not locked. That seemed wrong to Noah. Something so important should have been guarded. But perhaps Conrad had believed no one would ever look there. Noah carefully lifted the lid. Inside, beneath layers of foam and packing paper, was the original Founders Register. He recognized it instantly. The leather cover bore the dark water stain near the lower corner. The binding looked older, heavier, and more fragile than the polished imitation displayed beneath the ballroom lights. For a moment, Noah could only stare. He thought of Arthur Bennett. He thought of Evelyn. He thought of the atlas planted beneath his table. He thought of every time someone had looked at his foster care file before they looked at his face. Then he made the decision that would change everything. He lifted the register from the crate. He intended to carry it only far enough to show Evelyn. He never made it out of the corridor. 2 security guards appeared before he reached the service door. They moved too quickly. They did not ask why he had the register. They did not ask how he found it. They did not seem surprised at all. They took the book from his hands and led him toward the ballroom. At that exact moment, the orchestra began to fade. And beneath the stained glass ceiling, surrounded by donors, politicians, and cameras, Conrad Vale was preparing to tell the city what kind of future he believed it deserved. When the security guards escorted Noah Bennett into the ballroom, the orchestra had just fallen silent. The sound disappeared so suddenly that the room seemed to hold its breath. Hundreds of guests turned toward the boy in the borrowed Navy suit. Under the stained glass ceiling of the Halston Heritage Library, Noah looked smaller than he had only minutes earlier. His hands were empty now. The old Founders Register had been taken from him and held by one of the guards as though it were proof of a crime. Conrad Vale stood near the center of the room, surrounded by donors, city officials, cameras, and people who had spent the evening praising his generosity. He did not rush forward. He did not raise his voice. He understood that real power rarely needed to shout. Instead, He looked at Noah with carefully measured disappointment. To the guests, it seemed obvious what had happened. A foster boy had been found in a private service corridor, carrying the most valuable historical document in the library. The evidence looked simple. The story felt complete. And because Noah was young, poor, unknown, and already viewed with suspicion by people who had never bothered to know him, most of the room had decided he was guilty before anyone asked a single question. No one asked why a frightened 15-year-old would steal a book he could not sell. No one asked why security found him so quickly. No one asked why the original register had been stored inside a crate belonging to Conrad Vale's own foundation. They only saw what Conrad wanted them to see. The billionaire spoke to the room with a sadness that sounded almost compassionate. He described Noah as a young person who had been given an opportunity by the library, by the community, and by the very people gathered there that evening. He made it seem as though Noah had betrayed kindness. He made the guests feel sorrow for him, while quietly convincing them that he could not be trusted. It was a performance Conrad had perfected over decades. He knew how to make cruelty look like concern. Noah stood still beneath the stained glass ceiling, his face pale and his shoulders tense. He had spent years learning that when adults had already made up their minds, speaking too much could make things worse. So he said nothing. He only looked toward the rear entrance of the ballroom. That was when Evelyn Hart stepped into the room. She was not dressed like the other guests. She wore a simple dark coat over a plain dress. Her gray-brown hair was pinned neatly behind her head, and beneath one arm she carried the leather portfolio containing every piece of evidence she had managed to collect before Conrad's people pushed her out of the library. For a moment, no one noticed her. Then Conrad Vale did. His expression changed only slightly. It was small enough that most people missed it. But Evelyn saw the shift in his eyes. For the first time that night, the man who had controlled every detail of the gala looked uncertain. Evelyn walked past the donors, the board members, the city officials, and the photographers. She moved without hurry, but she did not hesitate. She had spent 20 years avoiding rooms like this one. 20 years allowing people to remember her as the woman who had supposedly betrayed the city. 20 years carrying the knowledge that the truth had been buried because no one important wanted to hear it. But this was no longer only about her. It was about Noah. It was about Arthur Bennett. It was about a library that had been built for people who had nowhere else to go. Evelyn stopped beside Noah and looked directly at the founder's register in the guard's hands. Then she looked toward the glass display case in the center of the ballroom. Inside the case, beneath a narrow beam of warm light, rested another version of the founder's register. The guests did not understand what they were seeing. Two old leather books could look nearly identical from a distance, but Evelyn did not need to touch them to know which one was real. The register beneath the glass was the forgery. The book Noah had found was the original. Evelyn told the room that Noah had not stolen anything. The real founder's register had been removed from the library vault and replaced with a false copy. Noah had found the original book hidden inside a crate, marked for private archival handling, a crate delivered by Vale Community Futures. A ripple moved through the crowd. Conrad responded calmly. He suggested that Evelyn was making another accusation without proof. He reminded the guests, in careful and indirect language, that she had once been involved in a financial scandal with the city. He wanted the room to remember her as a disgraced former auditor, not as the woman standing before them with evidence. It was the same weapon he had used 20 years earlier. But Evelyn had not come unprepared. She opened her portfolio and placed several photographs on a nearby table. The first showed the original register's old water stain, the dark mark near the lower corner of the leather cover caused by the Halston flood of 1947. The second showed the book currently displayed beneath the glass, smooth and spotless in the exact place where the stain should have been. The third showed the forged 1978 amendment that had supposedly allowed the library land to be leased to Vale Horizons. Then Evelyn began explaining the details. The register in the display case had been made with modern leather. Its gold edges had been chemically aged. Its thread stitching was too regular, too clean, and too new. The paper inside carried a watermark from a mill that did not exist in 1912. The pages had been machine trimmed, while the original book's pages were uneven because they had been cut by hand. To many people in the room, those differences seemed small, but small details were often where lies failed. Evelyn pointed toward the register Noah had found. The true book carried the old flood stain. Its leather had darkened naturally over more than a century. Its binding was heavier. Its paper showed the irregular fibers of handmade archival stock. Every mark on it told the story of time. The forgery only told the story of someone trying to erase that time. A woman near the front stepped forward. Her name was Dr. Maya Collins, a historical preservation professor from Halston University. Conrad had invited her to the gala because he expected her to praise the renovation project and speak about the importance of preserving the library's heritage. Instead, she examined Evelyn's photographs, then looked carefully at the book beneath the glass, and finally turned toward the register held by security. Her expression tightened. She confirmed that Evelyn was correct. The book in the display case was not the original founder's register. It was a reproduction. The ballroom changed in an instant. Until that moment, Conrad Vale had controlled the story. He had been the benefactor. Noah had been the thief. Evelyn had been the bitter former employee trying to ruin a charitable evening. But now, with one expert confirmation, the entire room had to consider another possibility. What if the boy had been telling the truth? What if the woman they had dismissed was right? What if the man they had spent years admiring was hiding something far worse than a forged book? Conrad tried to regain control. He suggested that the reproduction might have been created for preservation purposes. He implied that his foundation had simply handled the materials incorrectly. He said the original register may have been moved without his knowledge. But Evelyn placed the delivery manifest beside the photographs. It showed the private archival crate scheduled through Vale Community Futures. The reference number matched one of Arthur Bennett's old archival codes. Then Evelyn revealed the photograph Noah had found online, taken earlier that evening by a catering employee. In the background, clearly visible behind the flower arrangements, was the crate being moved into the loading area by a Vale Community Futures staff member. The register had not been misplaced. It had been hidden. And it had been hidden by people connected directly to Conrad Vale. Noah finally spoke. His voice was quiet, but it carried through the room because no one else moved. He explained that he had found the real register inside the crate. He said he had recognized the water stain because Evelyn had described it to him. He did not claim to understand every detail. He did not try to sound brave. He simply told the truth. And because he did not ask for sympathy, the truth sounded stronger. For the first time that night, the guests looked at Noah differently. They no longer saw a foster boy caught with stolen property. They saw a child who had been placed at the center of a lie. Evelyn asked the guard to place the real founder's register on the table. Dr. Collins put on archival gloves. Evelyn did the same. Together, They opened the heavy leather cover. The first pages contained the names of the original trustees, the handwritten donations that funded the building, and the founding records of the library. The ink had faded from black to brown, but it was still readable. The pages were delicate, but they carried the weight of a century. Then Evelyn turned to the section that mattered most. There, in Margaret Halston's original handwriting, was the condition that Conrad Vale had tried to erase. The land beneath the library had been donated for permanent public use. It could not be sold, leased, transferred, or converted into private commercial property. If the city ever attempted to use the land for private development, ownership would automatically revert to the Halston Community Trust. The Vale Center for Tomorrow had been built on an illegal promise. The 99-year lease Conrad planned to use was invalid. His $40 million donation had never been a rescue plan. It had been the first step in taking control of land that did not belong to him. The room became quieter than before. Somewhere near the back, a glass touched the floor and shattered. But the biggest revelation had not yet arrived. Evelyn had spent days studying Arthur Bennett's letter. She had understood that his codes were more than references to missing files. They were instructions. Arthur had hidden something inside the one object Conrad would never dare destroy openly. Near the back cover of the Founder's Register, beneath a narrow strip of worn leather, Evelyn found an old stitched seam. It had been repaired after the flood decades earlier. To anyone else, it looked like ordinary restoration work. But Arthur had known the library well. He had known that old repairs were often ignored because people assumed they had no importance. He had trusted that one day, someone would understand the clue he had left behind. Evelyn carefully loosened the seam. Inside the spine of the register was a folded packet wrapped in wax paper. The packet had been hidden there for 20 years. Evelyn opened it slowly. Inside were 3 things. The first was a notarized statement written by Arthur Bennett. In it, he described how he and Evelyn had uncovered altered land records, falsified redevelopment contracts, and diverted public funds linked to Conrad Vale's earliest business operations. The second was a duplicate ledger containing transaction codes that matched the irregularities Evelyn had discovered before the city accused her of fraud. The third was a list of account numbers, shell companies, transfer dates, and financial references connecting Vale Community Futures to the same network of accounts that had existed 20 years earlier under different names. The past had not disappeared. Arthur had preserved it. He had hidden it inside the very book Conrad had tried to replace with a beautiful lie. Conrad reached toward the table. It was only a small movement, but everyone saw it. Until that moment, he had remained composed. Men like Conrad Vale did not collapse the way ordinary people imagined. They had spent too many years practicing dignity in public. But when he saw Arthur's statement in Evelyn's hands, the color left his face. He knew exactly what the documents meant. The forged amendment connected to the false register. The false register connected to the illegal lease. The lease connected to Vale Horizons. The ledger connected to the redevelopment fraud from 20 years earlier. And the old case against Evelyn Hart was no longer a forgotten scandal. It was evidence. The ballroom did not erupt at once. At first, people simply stared. The mayor stepped away from Conrad. The library board chair lowered her glass. Reporters began moving closer, their phones raised, their cameras recording. Dr. Collins continued examining the documents. Her silence carried more weight than any dramatic announcement. Then someone from the city attorney's office stepped forward and requested that the Founder's Register, Arthur's statement, the ledger, and all related transfer documents be secured immediately. The gala was suspended. The auction never began. Conrad tried to speak privately with the board members, but privacy had disappeared from the room. The donors who had praised him all evening were suddenly eager to distance themselves. The officials who supported the lease began insisting that they had trusted the legal review process. The people who had benefited from Conrad's power discovered that they had never really known him. That was not entirely true. Some of them had known enough. They had simply decided that knowing was less important than staying close to him. Noah was released from security custody before the police even arrived. The guards apologized in the stiff, uncomfortable way people apologized.